Sailor the Piper Man, Piper the Sailor Man here. Happy Veterans Day. Today I remember my uncle who fought in World War II, and he told me a lot about the things that he had seen and what affected. He didn't speak with many people, but when he spoke about it, I was wondering if he was really telling me the truth or not. Well, I finished seeing a documentary of civilians that had taken photos and films and things like that that had never been seen before. Now, my uncle told me, and I didn't believe him, that hundreds of thousands of women were raped by the Red Army. Well, this documentary showed that 2 million German women were raped when the Germans came into Berlin. And from house to house, door to door, these German Red Army took their vengeance out for what happened at Stalingrad. I don't know if you've ever read the story, how the Germans decided to go in and were killing people in Poland and in the Netherlands and things like that. When my uncle told me that, I had no idea how bad it was. You know, I was a kid. I was like 12, 13 years old when he told me. And he told me the time that they went to the railway system and they opened the doors to these rail cars. You know, like a hobo will open the door to a rail car. When they opened the door, there were nothing but bodies and bodies and bodies, dead bodies, bone bodies of Jews and Germans and Polish and Czechoslovakian that had been killed. And they were just in there. You know how Hitler lied to the people. And when they got there, they were fighting against kids that were 13 and 14 years old. The worst part of what my uncle told me was, my uncle was a staff sergeant. And the policy was not to feed the German people. My uncle, he has a heart. He wasn't raised like that, to be cold-blooded like that. So what he would do after the GIs finished eating whatever was the leftovers, he would sneak it out. He knew somebody out in the community, and at night he would go out. This is like in Berlin or Frankfurt, one of the two. I'm not really sure anymore. And he would distribute the food at night. He was already doing it like for 3 months, and the people began liking him, trusting him, and the people were then telling their story to my uncle. My uncle kept it in his mind. He just couldn't see how, well, these are civilians, you know, how can we let them starve to death? And the whole city was, for 3 years, there was nothing but rations given out to these Germans. Not all Germans were for the war. My uncle was telling me many were against it, but they were helpless to do anything. They were dreading for their lives. So this was the American policy, not only the American policy, but Allies policies. Let these German scum die. And my uncle couldn't take it. So he went out there and began, for 6 months, he was feeding people, women and everything. He wouldn't receive anything in return. He didn't want anything in return. Anything what he got were a couple of pipes and things like that, and tobacco, exchanging tobacco. And then one day my uncle got caught. And he was busted down to a private. They gave him what's called captain's mast. He was in the army. And they busted his rank down for what? Feeding civilians, feeding the casualties of wars. He was at the Battle of the Bulge. He was there. He was also fought in the North African. He said it was worse than the North Africans, what they did to the Moroccans and the Muslims and things like that. The people don't talk about what Allied forces, even German forces, did to these people. They didn't want to wage war. They don't know about Muslims. So when I hear the rhetoric that all Muslims are evil and things like that, that's just not true. I mean, that's just not true. You know, the American government always with propaganda. There's propaganda coming all over the place. The German people were given so much propaganda to the Germans began believing it. That they were the master race, that they were the superior race, and they were going to have victory. And victory did come sooner against but once they started fighting the Russians and America entered the war, it totally changed for the Germans and the bombardments. My uncle said that they were going through buildings and the civilians were committing suicide because they thought the Americans were going to hurt them. And you see families hunched up together who had shot themselves, killed themselves before the Americans got there because of what the Third Reich had told them, that the Americans were going to come and kill them. He says in one day there were about 5,000 suicides, Germans killing themselves. Let alone thousands and thousands and thousands, millions of Jews died. But nobody really talks about what happened to a lot of these civilians. And my uncle, when he came out of the war, it really affected him. You know, he began drinking more. And the only time I really talked to him was once he had 2 or 3 drinks, he would get happy. And I would talk to him, and he would tell me, don't go to war. Whatever you do, don't go into the military. Obviously, I went into the military, right? But he told me, if you do, go into the Navy. He says, you see me, I'm always trying to stay happy and everything, because when those thoughts hit me of what I saw, he says, I can't believe that a human being could do those things to other human beings. And he says, fear your government as much as you fear other people's rhetoric. Because oftentimes your government is not telling you the truth. Fear your own government and fear those around you, because he says the world's full of propaganda to instill fear in the populace. And this whole thing, began thinking about this whole thing about the Congress not signing the bills and things like that, and people falling shortage. That's a way of controlling the populous masses. They wanted to see. Sometimes they do it as an experiment to see what would happen, how people would behave if they didn't have food. And we see how people get. The COVID, when that happened, you saw how people get. And we see after the COVID, we see how people have gotten more aggressive. So you need to be careful not only of the foreign governments and what they're feeding you on BBC and it's never the whole truth. It's half truths. And that has always stayed with me. My uncle, he always thank God that I'm not in the military, but he always said that all about the control mechanism and propaganda that is going on now, like 1984, that's happening now. Orwell's novel about population control, about this and that. You got to be careful with these social engineers. And so, I'm left thinking now about a lot of the things that I've been seeing the last couple of years, And we have to stay alert, and we have to be able to read between the lines. That's it, Sailor the Piper Man, Piper the Sailor Man, smoking minority. And I was just thinking about my uncle, a veteran. To all the veterans out there, take care. May the Lord bless you. And stay alert and teach what you can to others.